There are two forms of expat visa. One is a temporal or temporary, and the other kind, which is called a permanente. We committed to 8 to 10 years in Mexico for financial reasons. So we went direct to permanente. And what you have to do is show the Mexican government that you have the money to exist there without being a burden on the social welfare system.
In Ajijic and Ensenada, as where you are now, you have not felt uncomfortable about being an American.
No, Mexicans are super nice people on the whole, really lovely people. They don't hold where I'm from against me, which is a big surprise because when the current president came back into office, we all shuddered and said, oh, Lordy, what's going to happen to us? And the Mexicans just looked at us, shook their heads, smiled sadly, and said, it's your turn. And they're super sympathetic. They're used to corrupt governments.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today's episode is part of a series called Leaving America, about folks who have decided to move outside the country and how they did it. Our guest is Joanna Keenan. Joe and I worked together in Santa Cruz, California. We were both physician assistants in the same emergency department at the local hospital there. 8 years ago, Joe and her spouse, Kelly, retired to Mexico. 5 years ago, Joanna came out as a trans woman. We discuss our shared experience working in American healthcare and the decision to retire to Mexico and the logistics of that move. We also talk about her experience coming out as a trans woman in Mexico and her and Kel's decision to move back to the United States this year, in large part because they have turned 65 and now qualify for Medicare. Joanna Keenan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's so nice to hear your voice.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Oakland, California. I was an only child, and I had both parents in the house. They had me pretty late, so they were in their 30s and 40s when I was born. And I grew up in a pretty affluent part of Oakland. And I went through the local high school. I studied aeronautics at San Jose State University for a couple of years, decided that was too hard, transferred to UC Santa Cruz psychology program, which I loved, and graduated from there.
When did you decide to go to PA school?
After I got out of college, I had trouble finding work with a psych degree, which is not really a big surprise. When you think about it, most psych graduates go straight on to graduate school. And I found work at the local county hospital as I guess you could call it a nursing assistant on the inpatient psych units because my psych background was actually useful there. And I really liked it. And I worked doing that for a couple of years. And part of my job involved escorting people over to the emergency department or from the emergency department to whatever unit in psychiatry they were going to be staying on. And that's where I saw PAs in action, was in this county trauma center, burn unit, spinal cord unit, closed head injury unit. Really, the first time I saw big time emergency medicine in action, I fell in love with it. And I didn't want to go to nursing school. And I didn't have the emotional motivation to be a physician, so I went to PA school.
Where did you go to PA school?
I went to UC Davis. I wanted to get into Stanford, but I lacked some of the credentials that they wanted. They were very interested in training women and training paramedics, and I wasn't either of those. So I got into UC Davis instead and did their 2-year program. I was there 89 through 91.
So you graduated from PA school in 91, and then what happened?
I passed the PA boards, took a job at a local family practice and urgent care clinic. I was living in the East Bay at that time, and I hated it. And worse, I sucked at it. I was really bad at that. And so I quit the job and got in touch with the group that ran my old ER at Valley Med Center in San Jose and said, hey, I know you don't normally hire new grads, but I have 9 full months of experience now. And they said, sure, we know who you are. We'll take you back. So they took me on as a PA in the ER and basically raised me up right.
What was it about primary care that wasn't a good fit for you?
I have very little talent for long-term patient-clinician relationships, or at least I didn't when I was young. I do now. But back then, I could do 8 hours with somebody, no problem, but 8 months or 8 years was way outside my wheelhouse. I got frustrated with the slowness of it, just the the lack of progress that people made. And I didn't understand that what I was doing was treating chronic illnesses, that these people were always going to have this stuff. And I just wasn't emotionally suited or mentally suited to that kind of medicine.
So you found your home in San Jose in the ER. How long before you started working at Dominican?
Oh, that was about 7 years. I worked at Valley Med Center, and I worked at my group's other contract center, which was San Jose Hospital, which has since closed. And it was another trauma center. It was down in the gritty part of San Jose. And I liked both of those a lot. And after a few years of working those two sites, I got burned out on working overnight shifts. And I was looking for a day job. And I met a couple guys from the Dominican group. I met John Christensen and Mark Yellen, who were both moonlighting off and on at Valley Med. And they said, hey, we moonlight over at this hospital on the east side of San Jose. Why don't you come take a job there? And I took a 12-hour 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. job. I stayed there a couple of years, but they used PAs much differently, Andrew. At Valley Med and San Jose Hospital, I had a lot of autonomy and I handled pretty sick people, and it was really great. But CEP, Valley Med, actually used us more or less as emergency department case janitors. Anything that was just what they considered beneath their skills, they kicked over to my desk. So I didn't see anything that was remotely challenging or interesting except procedural work like suturing and minor fracture repairs, stuff like that. I saw a whole lot of hot kids, a whole lot of alcoholics. And after a while, it just got old. And I talked to Mark and John again because they were still moonlighting in there. And I said, I hear you guys have your own shop over in Santa Cruz. And they said, yeah, come work there.
You weren't part of California Emergency Physicians yet?
No, God, no. They weren't until, God, I'm not sure how many years later. I was at Dominican for 22 years, and CEP only had the contract the last 4 years I was there. So for 18 years, Santa Cruz Emergency Physicians Medical Group was a one-shop group.
Got it. Interesting. You felt like when you came to Dominican that you were able to use your skills more? Like they were able?
Yeah, they were happy to see me, and I was delighted to be there. I was living in Ben Lomond. Kel and I had bought a house there. And,
when did you and Kel get together?
oh, that's a good one. We met March 28th, 1988.
And got married soon after?
Yep, we got married almost exactly 2 years later.
So you guys were living in Ben Lomond. You were working at Dominican, and you did your 22 years at Dominican and retired.
Yeah. The practice had changed a lot. In the 4 years that CEP had it, they turned it into a much higher efficiency machine in the sense that they wanted to move people through very rapidly. And some of those people did really well and some of them didn't. And it was completely different than the practice style that I was familiar with and what I was good at. The emphasis on throughput was just very difficult for me.
I worked with you at Dominican as an employee of California Emergency Physicians. For some reason, I had a little bit of anxiety about talking negatively about CEP. I guess like deep in the back part of my brain, like it's imprinted that they gave me my first ER job and I owe them. Getting your first job in an emergency room as a newer PA, it's the hard one. Like getting an ER that's willing to train you and have somebody there who isn't going to be able to see 20 patients in their first shift. It's a sacrifice. The way it was presented to me is that there was a sacrifice on their part. I know that CEP is a very profitable business. I know that I made an okay salary, but you know what I'm saying? It could have been better. I feel like that there's definitely profit being made off of the primarily PAs, some NPs working in that business model. But I did want to talk about, and it happened more at the first place that I worked, which was in Roseville. I worked at Sutter Roseville. That was my first CEP.
That's right. I remember that
Department. And we used to have staff meetings once a month where they would put our productivity on a graph up on the screen, basically showing the average number of patients that each provider in the ER saw that month. And I will never forget that there was an older doctor who he routinely saw 11 or 12 patients per shift when they were really pushing for plus 20. And he was shamed and he retired early because of the shaming. What I would say is that if my child were hurt, I would want that doctor to pick them up. In the same way that if my child were hurt, I would want you to pick them up. If it's my family member, I want the provider to be willing to spend an hour with that patient. But within a business model, you're just not allowed to do that. It's because you're rewarded by the system for picking up as many patients as possible and just basically dispositioning them as quickly as possible and moving on to the next one, because that's how the billing works. Can you speak more about that and your experience?
Yeah, I can. What you described was exactly what I experienced across the length of my career, was a shift away from quality and into quantity. That was the shift I couldn't make, Andrew. I just couldn't do it. And for the exact logic that you just said, is that if it were your kid or your family member, your mom, your dad, how would you want them treated? Would you want the provider to blow through the room like they were on fire? Or would you rather they took every second they needed to do whatever you needed done? I would want the latter for myself and for my family and for my loved ones. And I never stopped wanting that. And I never stopped trying to deliver it. And yeah, I was down to 12 to 15 patients a shift in the last couple of months I was there because frankly, I was exhausted and done trying to fake it. I thank God Dominican never did the kind of shame session that you were exposed to. I think that is heinous. We received privately, individually received those grouped reports. So I knew what the other people around me were doing, but nobody ever sat me in a room with the rest of the providers and put it up on a screen. That's just scuzzy to me. And again, frankly, if I were sick, I would not want the 2-minute PA. I would want the 20-minute PA. I just really couldn't do what they wanted. And I knew that, and I know they knew that, but they were being patient with me. I realized the smart thing for me to do was to leave while I could. My mom had died in 2016, so we had a little more money than we had before. And in 2017, we talked to our financial advisors and they said, yeah, you could do that as long as you don't need to spend a bunch of money. You could retire. And the way we could afford to retire was to move to Mexico. So we did.
And I guess I never really thought about it because I wasn't planning on staying with CEP long enough to retire. And so I assume it was just 401k. Is that what we're doing? Like with matching 401k? Is that what we have?
Yeah, a very generous one.
And you'd also had savings from working prior to CEP coming on.
Yeah, I had rollover IRAs clear back to the guys who hired me at Valley Med Center, had a really good 401k plus match program. And Kelly is the financial brain. And Kel said all the way through, look, dump money into these. Just start pouring money into these as much as they'll let you.
And so you met with a financial planner. It looked like that the way that you could retire at that point was to move to Mexico. So it was really a financial decision. Were you guys particularly interested in Mexico?
No, we looked at a lot of destination countries, and there were some really great ones. We looked at Portugal, we looked at Italy, we looked at Ireland. We looked at a lot of places. We looked at, Costa Rica, briefly at Panama. And I think those were the major contenders, but we had 4 dogs at the time.
Gotcha.
And we didn't want to fly them. And we had a bunch of stuff that we wanted to move. We ended up moving way too much stuff, but that's later. So we wanted an overland move. And we discovered this community in Mexico on Lake Chapala outside Guadalajara. The community was called Ajijic, and it had a large, longstanding expat artist colony there, supplemented for many years by retirees as well. We're talking of upwards of 20,000 year-rounder American expats, and more than that in the winters. So it was a ready-made landing spot for us.
Gotcha. But y'all didn't stay there.
We did, actually. We were there 3 years. We built a house there. It would have been a good place, except that the community was not a good match for us. There were things we couldn't have known when we moved there. For example, the proximity to Guadalajara meant that there were a lot of weekend visitors from Guadalajara, and during the weekends was really crowded with weekenders. The expat colony there was really pretty great, I have to say. They were terrific. But the condo that we moved into had a lot of political problems. And in the end, we said, this is not that great a fit for us in enough ways that we want to move on. And what we had done was bought what amounts to a 2-room apartment in a beach town on the Pacific coast of Mexico, about 40 miles north of Puerto Vallarta. And so we had this place to move to. And that's what we did. We moved down there, spent a winter there, said, okay, we're going to sell the house in Ajijic, but the house on the coast is pretty small and it's pretty basic. And what we're going to do is we are going to set up a remodel and then leave for 7 months while that happens. That's what we did.
So I don't really know how to navigate this part of our conversation, but I think that it's relevant. Kel was like an icon in California for the court case, getting able to put an X for gender on the driver's license. This is your episode, not his, but I think I'll just mention Kel was born intersex and having that experience and then basically being an advocate for that community and making real progress. I just always assumed that played a role in the decision to leave the country, but maybe it didn't at all.
No, it didn't.
And then I guess it was a surprise for me to learn that you were trans. Can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Okay. I never felt right. Boy and man. I just never did inside. And I have a male body. I imagine if you were to genotype me, that I'd genotype male. I'm pretty sure about that. But it didn't feel right. And I had a brief moment of clarity as a small child where I saw pictures of some of the early transsexuals. And I thought, yeah, that's me. And then I forgot all about it for 50 years. And I had a lot of time to think during the pandemic. And this part is a really common chapter for older trans women, very common, that the pandemic was a trigger period for a lot of us. And coming out of the pandemic, my egg cracked. And I realized, oh my goodness, I think I'm trans. Oh my goodness, now what? And in Mexico, trans folk are very low key unless they're in the entertainment or sex business because it's a really risky culture to be out in. It's not at all friendly. I mentioned in my note to you that transfemicide is rarely even investigated. It's just something that we're paid too bad. All kinds of other abuses are also just normalized. There are a lot of reasons for that in Mexican culture, and it's really complicated and probably not worth going into. But as a gringo, I'm considered pretty weird anyway, just by the fact that I'm white-skinned and speak English and for some reason choose to live in Mexico. Mexicans know why we're there. It's inexpensive and it's comfortable. But the idea is that most criminals don't mess with gringos except for things like burglary and fraud. So I'm physically pretty safe as a trans person here, but I'm also unbelievably rare. Add to that hormone replacement therapy is quite literally over the counter here. I've been able to buy every single dose of estradiol and every single dose of progesterone and testosterone suppressants that I've ever taken without a prescription.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It's a trip.
Why is Mexico so lenient with what we consider prescription medications? Why are so many things over the counter in Mexico?
Two reasons. One is the government really believes, to a much greater extent than the US does for sure, that what you do with your life is your business. What you do with your land is your business, your home, how you earn your living or whether you don't earn a living, whether you maintain your car or it's a dangerous piece of junk rolling down the road ready to slaughter you and your family and any unlucky souls in your way. The point is that with a few rare exceptions, the Republic of Mexico chooses not to legislate its citizens' lives.
How many years have you been in Mexico now?
8 years now.
8 years. Do you see it as a good thing or a bad thing? That
That
sort of incredible libertarian streak of that Mexico doesn't really legislate auto safety, prescription drugs, land use,
literal
zoning,
meds,
code, all those sorts of things.
all that stuff. It is phenomenally two-edged, Andrew. It really is. If you want to make a really good life here as a gringo, as an expat, you very definitely have a really terrific life here. There are some things that are wildly different than the US that you have to accept along the way, which is that, would you like some examples?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned health insurance a little ways back. One
Yes.
reason we moved here was that health insurance isn't expensive here, or wasn't at age 57 for good quality catastrophic coverage. Because again, prescription meds are over the counter. And if you're like me and you have a medical background, you know what you need. You can buy your meds for probably 30% of what I would pay in the US. Round number, it might be less. Doctors are readily available and they are cheap because you can't sue. You have to prove intentional malice.
Mhm.
And there is no malpractice tort in the sense that we're used to it in the US. So medical care as delivered is cheap. On the bright side, on the lousy side, medical care as delivered can be super slipshod and you won't know because there's no way to cross-check that doctor. I'll give you an example. I had cancer. I had facial skin cancer in 2024 on my lower lip, and I needed the cancer cut off and fast. I was up in Canada. The Canadian system wouldn't even talk to me, quite literally. So I flew down to Guadalajara and I got it looked at within a week. I was on the operating table 13 days after my plane landed. And I had good surgical care and I had excellent aftercare and I've done fine. And all the path reports came out clean. And there's no reason to think that I will have a recurrence at this site, although squamous cell cancers come back somewhere else. But when I tried to bill my insurance, my dermatologist said, "Oh, so sorry, I'm not actually a dermatologist,
They were like general surgeon or
resident. I don't have a medical license yet. So I can't write a doctor's report for you. And without a doctor's report, you can't bill my services to the insurance."
how much was it to pay like outright?
$4,600 all in. All in.
Which I guess, like, on the one hand, in America, it would be more. But
Oh, yeah.
on the other hand, you probably wouldn't accidentally end up with a resident doing your surgery and not being able to write a report and therefore not being able to bill insurance.
The other thing about Mexican doctors is they want to be paid about half of their fee in cash.
So they don't have to pay taxes.
No record.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And because half of what I laid out, so about 2,000 US was paid in cash to various physicians, the total billable amount for my medical care came in under the deductible for my catastrophic care.
Got it. So let's go back to the catastrophic care. So how much were you paying as a 57-year-old in Mexico for catastrophic care?
Well, it was cheap. The first year I was there, I paid $3,500 for the first year.
Okay. So about $300 a month.
It might have been less than that, Andrew. It might have been less. It might have been as low as 200 a month, 2,400. I really don't recall exactly because we paid the amount for both Kel and I to the insurance agent at the same time. I just don't remember how it split.
Gotcha. And which is like astronomically cheaper than in America.
Yeah.
Your first couple of years, did you ever use that insurance? I guess the question is, like, how hard was it to use?
Oh, no, it was almost impossible to use. I used it. I had a hernia, and the hernia repair was I got about 50% of the cost of that back.
Okay. So it worked.
Oh, yeah. No, it worked. But honestly, it was much less expensive for me to see a private doctor who treated a lot of gringos and spoke fluent English and did anything I needed in the office. Gave me lab suggestions because, again, labs are over the counter. You can just walk into any lab and say, "I want this test and this test." And they say, "Okay, sure." And you pay in cash and you're done.
So you don't have to have somebody examine you and decide that you need these labs. You can just
No.
get them.
Same's true for MRIs.
You can go in and ask for your own MRI to be done. Like you said, I want an MRI brain.
Yeah. or a CT scan or whatever it is you need. You just walk in and say, I need this. And they say, that's fine. Can you be here Wednesday at 10?
That is so interesting.
It's usually read on the spot, and it's usually the radiologist performing the test.
I think another stereotype that folks from America have that give them pause about moving to Mexico is that crime would be out of control and that they would feel unsafe there. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Be delighted to. Mexico is far safer than the US in many respects, period. If you want trouble, you can find it really fast, and it's really bad trouble when you find it, particularly if you're into drugs, if you're into prostitution. Gambling, not so much. Gambling is completely legal and above board here. Prostitution depends on the locality. Drugs are tolerated in general. The story of marijuana legalization in Mexico is just silly. It's not legal yet, but it's supposed to be any day now for the last 5 years. But if you don't go looking for trouble, trouble will not find you. The cartels really don't like doing business with Americans. The other thing you don't want to get into is loan sharking. You don't want to borrow money here. But as a gringo, most of us don't have those problems.
So I'm assuming in the two expat, and you're also in an expat community now in Ensenada.
Yeah, not really. I'm in a really weird spot, Andrew. I live in a community that is a failed gringo beachfront condo, but it's made out of houses. And there's a form of community organization here that the US doesn't have called an ejido, which is essentially a native Mexican organization which held the land prior to federalization of deeds and grants of deeds. So the ejido had all this land, and unless the deeds are written correctly for each and every property, the ejido can sue to get it back.
Got it.
And that's what happened to this entire condo development, is that their deeds weren't written correctly. The ejido sued, and under Mexican law, they won, and they usually do. So unless you know that your deed is absolutely fireproof in Mexico, somebody can come along and claim it's actually theirs, and they'll win.
Wow.
Because the law, practically speaking, favors Mexicans over gringos considerably.
Gotcha.
For example, if you crash a car in Mexico and you're an expat, you better have insurance, because the assumption of everyone is it's your fault. And legally, that's the legal assumption. You're assumed to be guilty for the crash.
How expensive is housing in the communities where you've lived?
Okay, housing is different here. There's some stuff that you just don't get here. There are no heaters in homes for the most part. Some places you might have a wood fire. You might have a gas heater that's supplied by the landlord that you pay for the gas on, but most homes don't have heaters. Most homes are made out of concrete and brick. Most homes have electricity. Most homes don't have internet or phone service or cable. Oh, and most homes have concrete roofs. So leaks are not super common, but they're a pain if you get one. So rents are less because even as a gringo, it's not as expensive a property to own and maintain. Mm-hmm. Mexican rents are really pretty low. I live in a 3-bedroom, 1-story beachfront home, literally beachfront. 40 feet out my back door is the federal line where you can't build. And it's a beautiful 3 to 4 mile long white sand beach, no stones, gentle surf. It's gorgeous. I pay $1,400 a month.
Wow.
Yeah, I pay my own electricity. I pay my own gas. They supply what amounts to desalinated seawater. And you can't drink it. You have to supply your own drinking water. My house is pretty basic. And you can rent really nice houses in Mexico, true mansions, gated, fantastic homes for a lot more than I pay.
When you guys built your home in the first community, I'm so sorry, I can't keep forgetting the name of where you were first.
Oh, it's okay. It's a weird one. Ajijic.
Ajijic. When you guys built that home, how much did it cost to build a home from scratch?
Okay, we paid $85,000 for the lot, and it cost us $180,000 to build.
So about $265
all in. Well, no, by the time we got done furnishing it, decorating it, and put all the stuff we wanted in it, we were up to about $325,000.
Okay. but how big was that house? What was the
It was 2,250 square feet on two floors, master suite downstairs, really substantial living room and veranda upstairs, open plan design to a large kitchen with marble countertops and all the usual appliances, plus a reverse osmosis system. So we had steady supply of clean water. And oh yeah, and I had a full solar set put up on the roof so that I didn't have an electricity bill for 3 years. Their bookkeeping bill is 47 pesos or about $2.50 every 2 months. But I had to buy this thing.
And did y'all love that house?
Yeah, we were both really happy with the building and the garden and the saltwater pool. And right, we were. It was also 50 yards from the local trailheads, and we lived at 5,000 feet. And in the summers, when it rained, the mountains immediately behind town were these gorgeous tropical jungle trails. So we had a lot of fun with that. The downside of it was that it's a lakeside community. It's a large, broad bowl, and noise carries because everything is built out of stone. And the local residents, which we could not have known, have a cultural habit of firing off what amount to aerial firecrackers, but very large, called cohetes. And they do this for pretty much any reason at all. It could be an anniversary, it could be mom's birthday, it could be whatever it is, but they really do it over any kind of religious holiday. And the town's religious festival, its patron saint, was celebrated in the first week of December. And then from then until January 6th, which is the Epiphany or Three Kings Day, it's called here, it's the end of the official Christmas season. They would be firing upwards of 100 of those a day from one church. And I was within hearing range of three churches.
Wow. So I imagine that was not fun for the dogs.
Oh my God, they hated it. It does stop. It stops at around midnight and it starts at around 5 a.m.
Wow.
Yeah. And they fire from the churchyard because the church is fully in favor of this. And there's a guy down there at 5 a.m. smoking cigarettes and using the cigarettes to light the fuses. And he fires 50 or 100 of the things before he goes home at 8.
So I feel like we got into this conversation because we were talking about you basically coming out as a trans woman in Mexico.
Yeah.
I think we got into this conversation. We were talking about you being able to buy hormones over the counter.
Or anything else.
Or anything else.
Yeah. The only problem is there's no community to come out to.
Interesting.
I met one other trans woman on Facebook in the entire time I've been in Mexico, and I've seen a grand total of 4 or 5, and that's in 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, they just aren't out.
So I guess then your coming out experience has really been with Cal.
Oh, poor guy. I feel for him so much. Yeah, Cal has had a really tough time, and he's been an amazing support. But I need other trans folk around. And that's one reason why I want to go back to the US. Speaking for myself. For the two of us, we're turning 65. Going back really briefly to health insurance, my most recent health insurance bill for the year was $5,200. More than double.
And is it because of your age?
Yes. You can't get it after age 70 here. They won't write the policy. And the premiums climb really sharply after 60 because life expectancy here is low.
Got it. So ironically, America is very expensive for folks before age 65. Mexico's very expensive for folks in their 60s. And then you can't have insurance after the age of 70?
Practically speaking, no.
That is problematic. So it's just basically elderly people in Mexico have to pay for things out of pocket?
It's a combination of all three. There's a national insurance that you can sign up for. It's called IMSS. It's very cheap, and a lot of things in it are free. And I have a good friend who's 83 right now who has diabetes and chronic renal failure and arthritis. And he gets amazing care. And I went to the pharmacy with him, which is at the Federal Health Center. And I just walked in with his prescription and walked out with the drugs. There was no money exchanged. And he doesn't have any money. He lives on Social Security.
Got it. And I was going to ask about that because you're my 5th country. We've done Ireland, Germany, New Zealand, and Spain. And all 4 of those, They all four had very different experiences in terms of getting their visa and being allowed to be there. Can you just talk briefly about how it works for Americans who want to move to Mexico?
Yeah, it's really simple. There are two forms of expat visa. One is temporal or temporary, and that's a yearly. And you can have that for up to 4 years, and then you have to convert to the other kind, which is called a permanente. And the permanente is what we got to begin with, because for anyone who's sure about what they're doing, and we committed to 8 to 10 years in Mexico for financial reasons. So we went direct to permanente. And what you have to do is show the Mexican government that you have the money to exist there without being a burden on the social welfare system, and you can afford your life.
Got it. And so what would be like the low range of what they would accept? Do you know?
No.
I could speak for Spain because when I had that episode, Spain has very specific numbers. And basically it was like 36,000 euros a year, basically 3,000 a month. I was just curious if Mexico, what do you think? Do you think if somebody had guaranteed 3,000 a month that they could, that would so that would justify, like, you would be able to live in Mexico? You would qualify for the visa.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of money here.
And there's no employment requirements.
Yeah, it's actually the opposite. You're not allowed to have a job, at least not one that a Mexican would take.
Got it.
Yeah, you can't take a job away from a Mexican national. So the kinds of jobs that are available are real estate agent, something where you're essentially a contract salesperson.
Gotcha. And they don't have any restrictions on you working virtually. Are you allowed to?
No,
you, for example, could be doing remote psychiatry or.
Right, I could do telehealth. Yeah, that would be, there's no bar to that at all. And there are a ton of gringos in and around Mexico City that have been doing that, to the disgust and anger of Mexico City residents who say that they're driving up the rents in all the really good neighborhoods and destroying the character of the neighborhoods. There have been a lot of protests about it.
Gotcha. And I guess that brings up the point, at least in Ajijic and Ensenada, as where you are now, you have not felt any anti-American prejudice or felt uncomfortable about being an American.
No, Mexicans are super nice people on the whole, really lovely people. They don't hold where I'm from against me, which is a big surprise, because when the current president came back into office, we all shuddered and said, "Oh, Lordy, what's going to happen to us?" And the Mexicans just looked at us, shook their heads, smiled sadly, and said, "It's your turn." And they're super sympathetic. They're used to corrupt governments.
And you guys moved to Mexico 8 years ago. So it was during Trump's first term.
That's right.
And I imagine that it felt good to get away at that particular moment politically from America.
Very much. And there was in both administrations, there's been a big inbound wave of Americans.
Interesting. So you feel like there's more and more expats in
here in Ensenada? It's hard to tell because we're so close to California. For example, there are a lot of California plated cars on the road here.
Gotcha.
Well, and that's in the country. It's very true that there's a huge wave of inbound expats.
This is like my anecdotal experience. So I've been to Mexico a few times, and when I've flown into Mexico and haven't been near the border, I very much hear what you're saying about not feeling in danger and feeling safe and not worried about crime. However, driving across the border from California and Tijuana and that vicinity, it feels like a completely different place.
Yeah, it's even worse at the other border crossings. The Laredo, Juarez, Matamoros, the Texan and Arizona crossings, depending on mostly actually the Texas crossings, are generally across the border from Texas. There is a huge and dangerous slum. Tijuana is not bad.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
As a college student, I drove across, and with my California plate, I was pulled over and
instantly.
Yes. And told to pay money. And I did. And then I drove a little further and I got pulled over by somebody else. And I said, I just gave that last guy all my money. And they're like, oh, they already got you. Go on. Something like that.
Yeah. The cops here are very pragmatic about that. If you already bribed somebody, you can tell the second cop who, they'll drop it.
That I think gives some people pause about wanting to move
I
because,
had a terrible time with it.
okay.
I learned.
So now it's the second Trump administration. I think by any measure, folks would say that the political situation is worse than in the first administration.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'd agree with that.
Okay, tell me what gives you hope?
What hope for whom?
Americans living underneath Donald Trump,
Okay. Yeah. Scheinbaum is a pragmatist in a way that,
president of Mexico.
yes, Claudia Scheinbaum is a very pragmatic person. AMLO, her predecessor and her mentor, was not. He was an idealist. He was a Mexican nationalist who essentially was a populist in a way that bugged the crap out of Trump. And the two of them just were oil and water. But Scheinbaum is a diplomat in a way that AMLO was not. Now, unfortunately, and this is just my personal opinion, there is no way that I would ever be able to prove this, but I don't believe that any highly ranked politician in Mexico continues to live unless they reach an accommodation with the cartels and with the other billionaire forces within the country that run its operations. And Scheinbaum is no different. What she does have is an understanding that the thing that bugs the US and Donald Trump about Mexico is illegal immigration. Yes, fentanyl also bugs them, but she can't control that because the cartels control that, and she can't control the cartels. What she can do is control immigration, and that's what she's working on. And that so far has made Trump bearable. And the other simple fact is that Mexican trade is vital to the United States. Its labor force is as well. But America needs stuff that Mexico exports. Anything from avocados and limes on up to car parts.
That's really interesting. I'm definitely going to include this in the episode. However, I think I was getting to the point of your and Cal's decision, health related, to get your Medicare. You're moving back to the United States. And it just seems like the America that you left 8 years ago, the America that you're coming back to, that's what I was saying is different. And
Yes.
And in the interview that I did with Aaron Poe, who moved his family to Ireland, it was because he had a trans daughter in high school and things were very difficult for trans kids and their families with the new Trump administration. And so I would just think, as a newly out trans woman, that the America that you're coming back to is more hostile than the America you left 8 years ago.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And it makes me very sad. It's also something that I don't really have any control over. Kel and I looked at Ireland. We looked very hard at Canada, Andrew. I have citizenship there, and we're still in the process of applying for permanent residency for Kel in case. But we're not young. We're old. We're experienced. We are wealthy enough. We know how things work in Mexico. And if we needed to return here, we still have our permanent resident cards.
Got it.
We have exits if we need them. But practically speaking, out of all the different financial arrangements we looked at in all the different countries we looked at, the best place for us to have the best quality of life and the best medical services, honestly, because that was very high on our list. The problem with having insurance here is you can't use it. And I can get IMSS, but they're not going to do what I need. If I need a stent, that's not happening for me here. I would have to buy it privately. And that starts to get to be serious bread.
And I also think, based on what you said, I would say, based on what you said earlier, I would imagine that having a skin cancer removed, that's quite different than having a cardiac procedure.
I haven't had a cardiac cath, but I have had a CT angio cardiac.
Really? In Mexico?
Yes.
And you were happy with the care?
No. They did everything right. The procedure was perfect. And the results when I got them were perfect. But again, the cardiologist wasn't really interested in me because I wasn't a procedural case, and it took them 3 weeks to deliver the report.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just the cardiologist you get and the fact that you have no recourse, none.
got it. And I will make one little reference to the New Zealand interview. That was with an emergency physician who moved to New Zealand with her family. And I did just a basic Google search about the healthcare system in New Zealand prior to the interview. And the Google search said that New Zealand was pretty good. She had a very different opinion. And I just think it's interesting how I feel like for a lot of people, the grass is always greener on the other side. And so it's very easy to talk about the terrible things in the American medical system. But
There are terrible things in the system, but
there
one of
are
them is
terrible
wrong.
things. But there's terrible things in a lot of systems. She was talking about how if she wants someone to get an echocardiogram, she needs to admit them. Because if she does it as an outpatient referral, it will happen in 6 to 12 months.
Okay, that's the Canadian system. That's a Canadian problem. And that's what we discovered about Canadian healthcare in general is that, yeah, you have national health. And no, it doesn't cost you anything up front. But unless you have something really seriously wrong with you, you are at the back of the line, and it's a long line. I have a friend who has multi-level lumbar disc disease. He was a lobster fisherman for a number of years, and he's been blown out of an exploding boat. He's had some bad things happen to him. He has severe chronic pain. He's miserable most days. He won't take narcotics because A, they're not widely available, and B, he's not that personality to get relief from narcotics. It took him 2+ years to get a pain system consult, and it was 120 miles from his home. And let's take it one step further. Their pain consult consisted initially of an internet questionnaire, no interview, and a prescription for gabapentin. This is totally
Terrible.
for him.
Yeah.
But that's Canada, and that's
One of
how
the reasons
system,
why you're not going there.
Yeah, it's the reason, truthfully. We can afford the taxes. That's okay. We don't really want the weather, but we could have moved to Victoria. But when we looked at the quality and access to care, we said, I don't think so.
So you guys have decided to move to Nevada.
Yeah.
And is it because you were able to find housing that was affordable?
So in Nevada, we could afford a whole lot more house. We didn't really want a whole lot more. The place that we ended up buying was smaller than the home that we owned in Northern California. It's just that the tax structure there is very friendly. Cost of living is no worse than anywhere else in the US and better than some places. It's lower than California. We really wanted to be close to the Sierras, close to Lake Tahoe, and I wanted to be close to snow.
So do you have any anxiety about the politics in America that you're coming back to?
Yes and no. I think that the politics of the moment are extremely scary. Fortunately, I really believe that the counterswing will happen towards a saner government and society. I don't think the current situation is sustainable, but I don't think civil war is either. And I don't think most Americans would engage in it. In my personal opinion, the kind of authoritarian brutality that has been taking place since the new president was inaugurated cannot continue and will not. Maybe it can. I don't know. But the other thing about Kel and I is that we're pragmatists. Neither one of us particularly stands out unless we want to. I'm not that easy to see. I haven't stood up and moved around for you, but I don't look that much different than the person you knew in Santa Cruz. I didn't transition until I was 60. Most of my anatomy and physiology is exactly the same as it was. My skeleton face.
Do you have any regret about waiting so long to transition?
No, I don't, because I had no idea that I could. That sounds crazy, but it's the simple truth.
In the last presidential election, there was an anti-trans ad that the Trump team did where the ad said something like Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Trump is for you, something like that. A lot of pundits have said that Trump's anti-trans rhetoric helped him at the ballot box. And I don't know what it looked like from Mexico. I don't know if you have any comment or thoughts on it at all.
Trans-specific rhetoric, he's vile. Simple as that. This is a guy who will say whatever it takes to get the support from the people he wants and to meet the needs of the donors that put him where he is. He doesn't speak truth. He speaks whatever he needs to speak or whatever he wants to speak that suits him personally. As it happens, I don't think he likes trans people very much, just as individuals. I think he's got a personal problem with us.
If there are folks out there who have listened to some of the things you said about Mexico and are like, you know what, that might work well for me and my family, where do they go to learn more?
Oh, there's a ton of good information out there. Okay. If you want real world information about living in Mexico, there are a ton of good Facebook groups that are run by and used by expats, American and Canadian both. If you just research American expat in Mexico, you'll get literally at least 100 Facebook hits, probably 200, because every significant community has its own local expats page.
Is that how you and Cal did it? Did y'all do research that way?
We did some that way because we knew where we wanted to land. So we were able to queue in directly to the Ajijic groups and to the Chapala groups. And that was really helpful. A lot of people gave us great information and a ton of good advice and were there for us. We drove down in one day from the Texas border to Ajijic. It was like 14 hours. The driver was totally wiped out. He was utterly exhausted. He had driven up from Ajijic the day before, picked us up at 6:30 in the morning in Laredo on the Mexican side, and driven us clear back to Ajijic. He was wiped out. 10 o'clock at night, he dumped us, 4 dogs, and the contents of a completely packed VW van into a rental house in Santa Margarita, which is part of the Chapala area. Whereupon 2 expats that we had never met, but Kel had befriended, and they befriended Kel on Facebook, brought us a meal.
Wow.
And the next day, they took us out for Day of the Dead. It was wonderful. They really reached out. They were terrific to us. And expats in general are like that. They're very friendly. They're very anxious to help you get settled and make a place in their community because it is their home. So Facebook is terrific. There are a number of really good websites, but I haven't used them in years. The main things that anybody who's going to relocate to Mexico, please God, learn Spanish. Even if you speak it horribly, even if you can't write it, even if all you can do is baby talk, learn Spanish. Because nothing gets you respect and acceptance from Mexicans faster than speaking some Spanish, any Spanish. And nothing gets you disrespect and gets you shortchanged quicker than not being able to speak any Spanish or refusing to, which is viewed as horribly arrogant.
Have you met any expats who don't speak any Spanish?
Absolutely, yeah. But they tend to be in the big cities or the huge expat communities where there are sub-communities of Mexicans who make their living being intermediaries between expats and Mexico.
Gotcha.
That's particularly true in big towns like Puerto Vallarta. You don't need to speak Spanish there.
Gotcha.
The other thing is understand that Mexican law is not like U.S. law. It's Napoleonic. If you have a criminal problem, you are presumed guilty. If you hire an attorney, make sure they know what they're talking about. I've used an excellent immigration attorney, and I've used a private attorney for a problem with a neighbor where it turned out they weren't an attorney at all. They worked for their wife, who was, but didn't say that. So people's qualifications can be extremely flexible. Be really careful when you buy a property. If you decide to buy a property, make really sure that you get it checked out completely before you put any money down.
I was going to ask about that in terms of you built a house. Did you sell it?
Yes, we did.
And did y'all have any issues with doing major transactions like selling a home?
No. We used an American realtor. Again, this is a job you can do as an American, who is a really successful real estate agent in Ajijic. And we didn't have any problem with it. It's very different. Mexico uses a different system. You know how we have title companies?
Yes.
They don't. The feds license a particular class of attorney called a notario. And that notario is responsible for demonstrating to the federal government to its satisfaction that the transaction is legal and above board, that everybody's facts are correct. And it's on the notario. They can be criminally charged, they can be fined, they can go to prison if they don't get it right, they can lose their license. And that license is really valuable because you can't do a transaction without a notario.
Got it.
Yeah. So getting a good notario and getting a good real estate agent that will work with that notario makes all the difference in how well your transaction goes.
Got it. When you moved there 8 years ago, did you guys know at that time that there was going to be this turning 65 and health insurance in Mexico becoming too expensive?
Yes and no. We were aware of it in the distant future. The extent of the price hikes has been much steeper than it was in the preceding 10 years. So all of our references that said in the last 10 years, Mexican insurance prices for aging retirees have increased by this many percent. It's much steeper now than it was.
Have other expats led the way in terms of they had a great experience in Mexico and then they turned 65 and moved back to America? Is that a pretty common path or?
A lot of our friends have. They're older than we are for the most part.
Joanna Keenan, thanks so much for being on the show.
Adios.
Adios. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@ahlot.gov or call 907-269-0123.